Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello everybody. It's one of the great truisms, which of course makes it one of the great falsisms. Be yourself, we're told, means to align with your authentic thoughts, authentic values. It's bound up with self-acceptance, self-awareness, self-expression, all the rest of that nonsense. Suggests that we're very good at exploring our inner world and acknowledging and accepting our vulnerabilities. And we're told that if we're not being ourselves, we will stagnate and turn out to be fakes. But my guest today suggests that we shouldn't be ourselves. And indeed, he argues that authenticity is overrated. This book, I think, is a very healthy addition to the debate about the value of authenticity. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic is unusually international fellow, grew up in Argentina, of Croatian and Argentine parents, has an Anglo-French wife, lives part of the year in the UK, part in Brooklyn, New York, and is talking to us from Rome. Tomas, you sound a profoundly inauthentic character, are you?
I am, yes, I am. I practice what I preach, so I try not to be myself as often as I can, Andrew.
So what does that mean? Not being myself means that we have a self. Is that true, that we all have this kind of inner core? The person I blame for all this nonsense is the French philosopher or the French-Swiss philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who sort of introduced the idea of the authentic, the idea of us having a self. Do we all have one, Tomas?
This is a really good, and I think Swiss, right? But he wasn't
Swiss,
neutral.
yeah, but the French claimed him. You know, the French always
Exactly.
claim everything bad.
Look, I think the self is a sensible construction. If you define it in terms of, kind of our tendency or ability to stitch together our experience in a way that provides some allegedly meaningful form to our identity, that's the self. But there's actually much less consensus and probably less sense on the notion that parts of us are more authentic or real than others. So I would say yes to the notion of the self, but no to the notion of a real, true, whole, or authentic self.
So your book, Don't Be Yourself, Why Authenticity is Overrated, is less of an attack on Rousseau, less philosophical, more social scientific. You suggest in the book that the science tells us that trying to be oneself is wrong. What does the science say, and what kind of science is it, Tomas?
I think mostly the science of effective interpersonal functioning. First of all, anything meaningful that happens in our lives is a result not so much of how you think of yourself, but how other people think of you. And it will not surprise you to hear that decades of behavioral science or social psychological research show that people are typically seen as rewarding to deal with and thought of in a positive vein when they make an effort to engage in strategic impression management, when they see life particularly work and high-stake interactions with others, as an opportunity to display social skills, to engage in empathetic interactions, and
We
to
got
really
the E word now. You've thrown that one in with the A word. We've got empathy and authenticity.
Well, there is a tension between both, but if there is a ban on certain letters, let me know so I avoid them.
No,
Wasn't
I
aware
want
of
you.
that.
So you talked about something. What did you say? Strategic
self-presentation. I think fundamentally, Andrew, if I can summarize the book in one sentence, is like I'm trying to persuade people that it's advantageous, highly advantageous, to understand where the right to be you ends and your obligation to others begins. Not just for you as an individual, but also for, organizations and societies at large.
So the book is put out by Harvard Business Review. It's for this audience of business readers. You sometimes, I think, teach at Harvard Business School. You're part of this corporate world. You were the chief innovation officer at Manpower Group, which claims that a brighter future is humanly possible. So this book is directed at a discipline of how to be a more successful, a happier worker. Is that fair?
Not so much happier, really. Actually, a lot of the evidence that I contrast with the science of successful interpersonal functioning and, objective indicators of career success does show that people generally feel happier when they interpret their behavior as more authentic and when they see certain aspects of themselves as more real or more authentic. So there is, if you like, this tension between it feels good, there is a feel good aspect associated with, oh, I am free to be myself and to express who I really am, even if that's just according to myself. But on the other hand, the more important element and what I focus on in the book is that if you want to get hired, get promoted, or be an effective leader, you need to really focus less on how to unleash your unfiltered, uninhibited self on others, or express, if you like, the version of you that you think is real, and more on what other people find valuable and meaningful. And especially, I spent a lot of time working with leaders, assessing and developing their potential. If you want to evolve as a leader, one of the fundamental things that you need to learn is how to go against your nature, not be limited by your past and present self, but learn to do things that are outside of your comfort zone and expand or broaden your reputation by doing things that actually are not your natural strength.
In other words, read Machiavelli and not Rousseau. Sometimes these business books, Tomas, and your one sounds intriguing, but some of these business books, they basically just state the obvious. Isn't that obvious that we should tell people what they want to hear rather than what we want them to hear? So if you meet someone who seems a certain way, you present yourself in that way. In a sense, then what you call strategic self-presentation is about the fact that we're all salesmen when it comes to relationships in business and in private life, and perhaps even in terms of ourselves. We think of ourselves, we have an inner dialogue, don't we? So are you suggesting that we should also lie to ourselves, or at least be creative?
No, we already lie to ourselves. It's probably the most consistent and widely replicated finding in the social sciences, I would say. People bullshit themselves.
It's what makes us human. It's something we should be proud of, right?
Well, I think being proud of that is part of the same sort of like narcissistic or self-enhancing flaw. Just because we do it, we're proud of it. There are obviously some disadvantages to doing that. At some point, having a reality check or understanding, for example, that you're not as funny as you think, or that you don't smell as nicely as you think, might be advantageous. But then equally, what's actually interesting and worthy of sort of mentioning is that if you go to a job interview thinking that you're as creative or innovative as Elon Musk or as funny as Chris Rock, even if you're totally deluded, actually, that delusion might turn into a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you compare two imaginary candidates interviewing for a job, and one of them is honest with himself and honest with others and answers questions like, well, I don't really know how to do this job, but if you hire me and I'm right now very desperate for a job, I'll try to learn it and I'll do my best, versus somebody who said, oh yeah, I've done this 100 times and I'm the best thing since sliced bread. I can tell you who will get the job.
The second one, presumably, right?
Yeah, and that's unfortunate for society. But if we you mentioned Machiavelli, this isn't about kind of sort of like promoting unethical political skills or tactical manipulations, but simply acknowledging the fact that interaction is where the action is, and every consequential interaction we have with others is a performative act. Let's stop pretending that people are interested in knowing who we really are deep down. They are not. They're interested in seeing the best version of ourselves. And by the way, yes, it is common sense. But isn't it interesting, Andrew, that in many areas of life, and particularly in the world of pop psychology and management thinking or business discussions, the mainstream view has become so ridiculous that the commonsensical view is controversial or heretic?
Yeah, maybe there's a Darwinian quality to that. That if the absurd position becomes the orthodoxy, then it enables guys like you to write books. You one of your previous books, which actually did incredibly well from 2019, is Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Leaders? Maybe it should be Why Do So Many Incompetent Men Become Podcasters? Is this very much of a male quality, Tomas? Do men, I wouldn't say lie, but create themselves, shall we say, to use a euphemism, better than women? And is the authenticity movement then, does it have a gendered quality? Do women like the idea of authenticity more than men?
Oh, let me start with the second part of your question, which I love or I prefer. It's I think pretty obvious that authenticity has been to some degree co-opted or hijacked and maybe even weaponized by
the W word, weaponized.
Okay, how many? We have 28 letters in the alphabet. I covered 3.
We've had authenticity, we've had empathy, and we've had weaponized. Go on.
Right. By talent management interventions, HR departments, especially diversity and inclusion interventions, right? It's like, oh, let's tell women they can just be themselves. But actually, authenticity tends to be a privilege for the status quo, for the elite, for the in-group. The more status you have, or if you like, plainly put, the more power you have, the less bothered you are about what people think of you. You have your own podcast, so you can, do whatever you want here. If you had your own social media platform, you could do whatever you want, right? So
I can't afford one of those. And you put it very nicely in this on LinkedIn. Yeah. You said, and I'm quoting you, our freedom to be ourselves, quote unquote, ends when our responsibilities to others begin, which is why authenticity is a privilege for the elite. Only those who enjoy an excess of power feel entitled to behave without any concern or consideration for the rest. I'm not sure whether that's a celebration or a critique of authenticity.
No, I think it is it attempted to be a descriptive statement, but the reality is, going back to the gender differences that you alluded to, is that women don't have the same freedom to be themselves, or don't experience the same liberty to be themselves as men. I think personally that the world will be better off if we spend less time pointing the finger at women and telling them they should just be themselves, and more time pointing the finger at incompetent leaders and asking them to please not be themselves as much. And that takes me to the first part of the question, which is, there is female and male incompetence and female and male competence. The point that I highlight in that book is that there are gender differences in self-perceived competence. Men tend to think of themselves more highly than women. And in a world that confuses confidence with competence, we actually assign leadership roles to people who think very highly of themselves. And oftentimes they're actually not very talented at all. So it's an attempt to focus people more on substance and less on style, and to actually understand that if we continue to celebrate self-belief as opposed to self-knowledge, and we're not competent enough to understand whether somebody has the potential to be a good leader, this this phenomenon will keep on going on and on and on.
Yeah, and a lot of your other work has touched on this. You wrote a book called The Talent Delusion, and you have an audiobook out on confidence. So what are you telling people, Tomas? Are you telling them that they should be more or less confident, more or less deluded about their own talent? Should we recognize that we probably are incompetent, but we need to nonetheless not... Well, I mean, I guess if we are by definition incompetent, then we shouldn't be ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? I mean, we should... I mean, how do we become... Yeah. Let me ask you, let me rephrase the question. How do we become more competent as people and in the workplace? They're all bound up with one another. Should we be more or less confident, more or less honest with ourselves, more or less authentic?
If you want to boost your competence, it helps to actually gain some self-awareness, understand what you know and what you don't know, which typically results from paying attention to how other people see you, having the humility and the self-critical maturity to not just seek, but also internalize critical feedback from others, so that you can close the gap between your skill set and your aspirational skill set. However, if you want to succeed in life, bullshitting others will be a lot easier if you can bullshit yourself first. So in a way, what I'm highlighting through all my work, and thank you for showing so many of my books, is this tension. What's good for the individual might not be good for the group or the collective, but what's good for the collective tends to be good for the individual. You see, I grew up in Argentina, where I think we're the only perpetually declining nation in the world. And at the beginning of the 20th century, we were one of the richest countries on earth.
Yeah, I think top six. It's an astonishing story.
And according to some, top three. I mean, in Paris, they
especially
had an
Argentinians, it was top three.
Yeah, right? exactly. And so, we are widely known for our self-belief and astronomical levels of confidence. But if it's detached from your actual talents and accomplishments, it's a slippery slope. You have to, at some point, just maintain your delusion, because a reality check is too traumatic. You mentioned Darwin, right? And Darwin actually talked about he's famous for really a diluted or bastardized version of selection of the fitness. Or when we say something is Darwinian, what we mean is like there's a system that is ruthlessly competitive and people are going to fight to get to the top, right? So Enron or Goldman Sachs or a successful company is Darwinian because everybody's trying. Actually, that kind of competition is harmful because it leads to free riders, imposters, and if people in the same team are trying to cheat each other, you have a toxic culture and there's no trust, and then only deception will be rewarded, right? Contrast that with a system that is meritocratic or fair and where people succeed because of their actual talents. See, when I compare, I just came back from Singapore, and the difference between Argentina and Singapore is clear. One place focuses on bullshitting others as a methodology for advancing life, and the other focuses on talent and hard work.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's a
it's more
great
enjoyable.
contrast. Singapore and Argentina. That should be the subject of another book, Tomas. And I was going to actually follow up. You're an unusually international fellow. You travel all over the world. You teach in London. You spend part of your life in Italy. You're in the United States. You're from Croatia and Argentina. Is America the next Argentina? Do you fear that this ideology of being oneself has become a kind of, or it's the national ideology? Of course, there's a character now who I'm not going to name names here, but there's a man in charge who seems to be the model somehow, or the anti-model for your book. Is America then becoming the 21st century version of Argentina? By the end of the 21st century, Americans talk about, well, we were once the top power in the world, and now we're down there with Argentina. I mean, I'm not interested so much in macroeconomic stuff, but more in terms of this issue of having this sort of delusional ontology of seeing the world entirely unrealistically.
Yeah. So in a way, I think. Well, so I don't know if it's going to be the next Argentina. I mean, it could be, and that sounds extraordinary or unthinkable to anybody, given the wealth, the success, and many of the indicators. At the same time, I think most people can see a reading of the macroeconomic or political spectrum where the second global superpower is clearly catching up and has been catching up, right? And if you think about it, America
which is
has been
more like Singapore, I mean, in terms of models.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to create a Singapore on scale, right? In the case of China. But I think what's also a fact is that if you think about it, America hasn't even been the dominant global superpower for 100 years. After its critical intervention in World War II, by the time they entered, they were the richest. But only after that point, around 1940 something, it became the dominant superpower. So in the grand history of empires, 100 years is very short duration, very short duration. But I want to say two things. One is that, yes, of course, I think that this excessive cult of self-belief, authenticity, overconfidence is unhealthy, and it's potentially breeding narcissistic zeitgeist. That's the N word, by the way, if you were about to say it.
Yeah,
so yes,
narcissism. You're throwing that one in. That's another good word. We got narcissism. What do we got? Empathy, narcissism, authenticity, and weaponized.
You are in the West Coast, where I think a lot of this, more LA than San Fran, where a lot of this kind of comes from. So I do think that there is
everything,
danger.
Thomas, comes originally from San Francisco, not from LA.
Okay. There is a healthy aspect to kind of nurturing or promoting narcissistic entitlement, even if you think that you're actually promoting self-help or some kind of healthy coaching. But on the other hand, there is the competitive edge that America has had and maybe still enjoys as a consequence of basically removing any inhibitions from anybody. If you truly persuade people that they can do whatever, I mean, even if you're as wacky and crazy as Tiger King, I don't know if you watched the documentary, it's like, the French could never produce a guy like Tiger King. And the guy probably made millions out of the TV show watched everywhere else. So here I'm highlighting the reverse, which is that if you really make it very easy for people to fail, and you create a mindset whereby people are not inhibited at all and they feel that they could do anything, even if they feel that they are the next Trump or Elon Musk, and probably they won't be, but the 0.1% that makes it will have tremendous success. And if you don't care so much about the fact that the remaining 99% or 99.9% doesn't do well, and they're actually brainwashed into thinking that the American dream is alive and well, I mean, it's you have more diversity, at least intellectually speaking, and also from a Darwinian sense, the 0.1% that is selected might be very, very good. So look, the best theory of innovation is that, or creativity, is that it's a two-step process. One is random variation, and two is rational selection. I do think America does random variation much better than Europe, and better than China, and better than anywhere else.
You also written a book about AI, like everybody else, I, Human. Yeah. In our age of AI, Thomas, being ourselves acquires an added dimension. Yeah. How does the idea of authenticity and not being ourselves and all the other arguments you make in this new book, how do they play out in an AI world where it's increasingly hard to distinguish between Anthropic's Claude and Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic?
Yeah, so that's the point. AI is getting so good at simulating or emulating human-like output, which is, of course, the original definition of AI by the great Alan Turing. Machines will think, or we might call them intelligent, when they can produce something that, to the eyes of an expert, is unrecognizable or indistinguishable from human content. Already today, if people are watching us, they won't know if we are a deep fake or the real Andrew Keen, the real Dr.
Well,
Tomas.
I always ask my guests that, how would you, and I'm slightly changing the subject, we'll come back. Yeah. How would you prove that you are actually Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic as opposed to a bot?
I cannot. But to answer your previous question, the paradox, if you like, is that because AI is getting so good at copying us and everything we do, it's putting more pressure on us to fake authenticity, to do things that we wouldn't actually do. There's been studies already that swearing, for example, people think that they're interacting with a human. There are humans that are having ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini create their emails, and then they're deliberately inserting typos or grammatical errors there to see. So actually, human imperfection or serendipity is now becoming a kind of artificial hallmark of authenticity. If you do something,
there was an interesting. I don't know if you saw the piece. There was an interesting piece in the FT recently about how swearing now has become so mainstream and normal, and maybe that's part of this process of us feeling sort of species insecure, and that we need to swear, we need to behave in ways that make us feel more authentic, not just appear but feel authentic.
Yeah, exactly. But the real rewards are for what you appear. And, of course, there are great rewards for appearing authentic. But the irony is that to appear authentic, you need to be more and more deliberate, more and more strategic. Same when people send you, messages on LinkedIn or via email. I often respond, "Are you human?" And there's no way of knowing, right? But if the person says something surprising, unpredictable, of course, AI will quickly, if we all swear, AI will start swearing to imitate humans. And there's this interesting cat and mouse chase or game whereby, because AI is copying us all the time, there's more pressure on us to be original, to create. Same, by the way, with the arts. I don't know if you're a music fan, but Spotify and YouTube could probably automate 99 or 100% of their artists. AI Taylor Swift would probably be as good or similar to Taylor Swift. But if AI automated all the musicians in the world, I don't think it would kill musical creativity or musical innovation. It would push artists to create something that AI can do. And this is the kind of a race or the battle or the challenge that humanity is facing now. How to do things that machines still haven't figured out how to do.
Yeah, how to not be ourselves. We had Geoffrey Hinton, the godfather of AI, on the show a few months ago. And he acknowledged that he has no idea of whether AI is going to destroy our species. So he gave it a 10 to 15% chance. But then at the end, he said, the way to save ourselves is to give AI female qualities, which I think in terms of your arguments might not be true. If you were in charge of OpenAI or Anthropic, what values would you give this new technology in terms of this argument you're making about not being ourselves? What should AI be trying to bring out of ourselves?
So I read and heard his comments, which went viral, and I think some people found them controversial, because I think it is still controversial to say that things like empathy, kindness, and even like agreeableness, or the ability to not be yourself. Emotional labor is now a very dated term, but for a while it was associated with female staff in hospitality, and the point was to say, oh, poor women, they're repressed because they have to make an effort to manage their reputation. I absolutely agree with Jeff Hinton that A, these qualities are more feminine than masculine, and that B, they're not just a way for us to find behaviors or an approach to work and life that is less likely to be cannibalized or automated or emulated by AI. But actually, if you're running these companies or programming the AI, you need some of these pro-social and ethical values and instincts to ensure that the technology causes more good than harm. So I think he was onto something.
Yeah, it was funny. At the end of the interview, I don't think he cared for it much. It probably wasn't a very good interview. He said to me when the mic went off, why are you so horrible? And I'm not sure. Should I have taken that as a compliment or a criticism?
I mean, I think it is a criticism.
But he meant it as a criticism, but should I take it as a criticism? Or should I actually be rather complimented that he would say that?
You always have more to gain if you take it as a criticism, or at least ask yourself the question, should I have done something differently? At the same time, I think you have a specific style that is, at least, stands out. I think you're sort of like creating a sort of a version of Jeremy Paxman light or something like that.
Yeah, so light? I thought it was heavy.
Yeah. Well, you have to repeat the same question over and over again. So I think at least it's a little bit, you make more of an effort than him. That's a compliment.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure if I should take that as a compliment or criticism. So do you think I should be a little softer, a little bit more empathetic?
I think that you should probably just beware of the fact that some of your guests might not be too thick-skinned and so resilient that maybe they get upset and offended. I think you should mix it up a little bit, right? If you're be a little bit less predictable, so you can be tough with some, but then kind of a little bit complementary, or I would say collegiate and affiliative with others. If you mix it up, it creates more of a surprise effect for your guests and the audience. But it's your show.
Well, when anyone says it's your show, it means it isn't. When a publisher says to you it's your book, they're actually telling you that you have to do it in their way.
They never ever told me that. They just tell me.
They didn't tell you that at Harvard Business Review. Yeah, and I guess what you're saying is make your guests slightly uncomfortable, which is true. They never know quite what to expect. Is that true in life too, Tomas, that in work or perhaps in life, it's good to keep people on their toes, never for them to never quite know who they're with or who they're dealing with or what's next coming out of their mouth?
Look, if you're seriously asking the question, I think
no, it's a serious question.
Yeah,
I'm less interested about me, but that question about should we always be keeping people on our toes? In other words, when someone sits down with someone, there's always the idea, well, make them comfortable, and it's back to the authenticity, make them feel at home. But are you suggesting really it's probably best that when you sit down with someone, you might be thinking, coming back to, I don't know, Darwin, that you're sitting down with a wolf or a tiger or a lion, and you're never quite sure what's going to happen?
I think if you're a boss, it's best to avoid creating such degrees of uncertainty and unpredictability that your staff, your direct reports, your teams are going to be stressed out, and that's not, you're not supposed to create a roller coaster of anxiety environment there. But I think if you're a podcaster, you are supposed to make people think, and you're more likely to make your guests and your audience think if you can create a certain element of spontaneity, improvisation, and you're actually, it's like, so I like that about your style personally. If you're just like, okay, and what about this and what about this, first you're prepared, and then secondly, I think at least if I think about myself as an audience, when I listen to podcasts or a debate, I like seeing people not agreeing and trying to find ways to disagree or ways to agree, and kind of testing the arguments.
I agree. I'm joking.
There you go. There you go.
Thomas, we've mentioned Rousseau and Machiavelli.
Yeah.
But the one great philosopher we haven't mentioned, modern philosopher, is Thomas Hobbes, and the foundation of all his theories, particularly his political and psychological, were built on fear.
Yeah.
Why don't management theorists like yourself talk about fear? After all, most of us work because we fear starvation or failure. And most of the time in the work, I've never really had that many jobs, but whenever I've had jobs, everyone around me seems to be deeply fearful of being fired or being embarrassed or failing. Why doesn't fear play out in these kind of narratives? And in terms of being ourselves, should we acknowledge that we walk around, particularly in our professional lives, terrified all the time that we're going to fail, that we're going to be embarrassed?
It might just be, the evolution of modern human resources departments. They have created or sort of shaped workplace cultures in a way that is a little bit infantile, I think, infantile. And where this notion of sort of like employee centricity, which may have started as a consequence of McKinsey's war for talent. If you want to compete for people, you need to create office spaces that are like adult version of Disneyland or amusement parks, and give them a foot massage and have a sushi chef and do their laundry and tell them they're amazing, and even eliminate negative feedback.
In other words, get a job at Google, right?
Well, I think a lot of these sort of like cultural tenets are associated with Silicon Valley in general, I would say. If you contrast that to 1980s banking or pharma and law firms, etc., they were much more run on fear. But you still have places today, or I would say even in these places or cultures that pretend to be very employee-centric, actually, we might sort of like create the illusion that you shouldn't be afraid, but those are the most dangerous cultures and places. Because if your boss sits down with you and like you wears a hoodie and tells you what they did over the weekend and smokes a joint with you, they're still your boss. So right. You might relax too much, but maybe next week they have to fire you.
Yeah, they'd probably still wear the hoodie when they fire you, or they probably fire you on email or on instant messaging.
Or they outsource it to agentic AI, and agentic AI tells you you're fired. But I think the second part of your question,
which is not a joke, I'm sure that's what they would do, actually.
I mean, we're getting there. It's more efficient, isn't it? But I think fear is a great motivator to the second part of your question. And I think, look, there's a lot of studies showing that extraordinary achievers and exceptional achievers suffer from imposter syndrome. They think of themselves in a very self-critical way. They are really, really afraid of failure, and that's why they overcompensate and they prepare a lot, and they're so prolific and they work very. It's a very miserable kind of state of mind, but it's a very good recipe for objective accomplishment and actually achieving high levels of career success.
Yeah, and Elon Musk comes to mind. There was a big story this week about his father being a sexual criminal of some sort. These kind of books, Thomas, always come with corporate models. Like, who would be an example that we should try to emulate, or is that the wrong question? I mean, Steve Jobs often comes up. The more you talk, the more it occurs to me that I'm not sure if Sam Altman is the model or the anti-model for your argument. Are there corporate characters, famous leaders who are your model, who we should try and emulate? Who comes to mind?
I think the vast majority of effective leaders know what to communicate, whether it's their emotions, their ideas, their beliefs. Look, I'll give you a very simple example. I think competent leaders today, for example, know that it's advantageous not to broadcast their unsolicited views about controversial and diverse, divisive or polemical
Right, so
global events.
assassinations, for example,
Yeah,
recent
or like,
assassinations in the United States. It's best
yeah,
to not
for
talk
example.
about those.
For example, right? So, and I think if anything, you mentioned, or without mentioning Trump before, I think Trump and the rise of leaders who have that kind of similar kind of personality, or at least behaviors, where they seem very authentic because they are sort of like anti-establishment heroes, and they're engaged in sort of like politically incorrect and sometimes aggressive and antisocial behavior. People like them because they are disenchanted with what they had for a long time, which is a political class, and it's the same for leaders in general, that are so blatantly faking it that they crave something that seems more authentic, right? And so I think, it's important to understand that just like there are benefits of keeping certain aspects of your whole self at home, and there are benefits of exercising self-control and not telling people the first things that you think, there are also important benefits to not being or acting like a traditional politician. If you're so obviously faking it, nobody will trust or believe you. So it's the in-between kind of sweet spot or balance that we need to try to achieve, whether we're leaders, employees, or just human beings.
In other words, don't all try and be like, what's his name? Javier Milei, the leader of Argentina.
Yeah, what about him?
Who makes Trump look like a bank manager?
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. We could have a whole show on him, by the way. But
well, you'll have to come back. We'll do another show. You have a very interesting
Yes.
new book out. Don't Be Yourself: Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead. I'm not sure we got the answer, Thomas, but we know what we shouldn't be, which is authentic. Yeah. I now figured out why you're leaving Manpower. Maybe are you going to a company called Woman Power?
Very good. People do mention this, and it might just be human power, but in the AI age, who knows? Maybe we have none left.
Well, the book is out in a couple of days, on October the 7th. Don't Be Yourself: Why Authenticity is Overrated and What to Do Instead. I think it's going to be another big success. Tomas Chamorro-Premuzic, certainly the best named character we've had on the show recently. Thank you so much. Real honor. And we'll get you back on. Lots more to talk about.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I love your glasses, Andrew.
Yeah, so does my wife.